The late afternoon sun painted Redemption Creek in shades of copper and gold as Clara Whitmore stood before the wooden counter of Miller's General Store, her trembling fingers wrapped around the last possession of value she owned, her grandmother's pearl drop earrings. The proprietor, Mr. Miller, studied them with calculating eyes, while her empty stomach twisted with 3 days of hunger. "I'll give you 50 cents for the pair," he said, his tone suggesting even that was generous. Clara's vision blurred. 50 cents wouldn't buy passage on the westbound stage, wouldn't rent a room, wouldn't even feed her for a week. Behind her, the door chimes rang, but she couldn't tear her eyes from those pearls, the last physical connection to the grandmother who'd raised her, who'd promised her a life better than being forced into a dowry arrangement with Harold Griggs, a man twice her age, with hands that left bruises and breath that reeked of whiskey. "Gold isn't what we need here. Integrity is." The voice was deep, commanding, and unfamiliar. "And a woman shouldn't have to sell her memories to survive in my town. Before I continue, I'd truly appreciate it if you could take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support is incredibly important to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. I'm also curious, where are you listening to this story from today?" Clara turned to find a man who seemed carved from the very mountains surrounding the town. Sheriff Wade Dalton stood 6'3", his shoulders broad enough to block the doorway, his sun-darkened skin stretched over muscles that spoke of years breaking wild horses and harder men. A silver star gleamed on his leather vest, but it was his eyes, storm gray and impossibly direct, that made her breath catch. "Sheriff Dalton," Miller stammered, "I was just conducting business." "You were taking advantage." Wade's jaw tightened beneath several days' worth of dark stubble. "Miss," he waited, his gaze never leaving Clara's face. "Whitmore, Clara Whitmore." Her voice emerged smaller than she intended. "Miss Whitmore doesn't need charity, Miller. She needs honest work." Wade stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of leather, sage, and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "My housekeeper took ill and moved back east to family. I need someone who can cook, keep accounts, and isn't afraid of hard days. Room, board, and $30 a month." Clara's fingers tightened on her grandmother's earrings. $30 was more than most women earned in 3 months. It was also far more than any respectable woman would accept without suspicion. "I don't," she began, her voice hardening with the defensive pride that had kept her alive since fleeing St. Louis. "I'm not that kind of woman, Sheriff." Something flickered in Wade's expression. Respect, she realized with shock. "I didn't think you were, but I am the kind of man who honors his word. You'll have your own room with a lock only you hold the key to. You'll work daylight hours, and if you want to leave, I'll provide passage to wherever you need to go. No questions asked." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "But you look like you've been running scared, and I'm guessing you need a place where the law stands between you and whatever you left behind." The kindness in his rough words nearly undid her. Clara hadn't cried when her father had announced she'd been forced into a dowry agreement with Griggs. Hadn't cried when Griggs had cornered her in the garden and torn her dress while growling about his rights. Hadn't cried during 3 desperate weeks traveling west on sheer determination and stolen coins. But now, standing in this dusty general store, with a lawman offering salvation without demanding her dignity as payment, tears burned behind her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. Wade's expression gentled without losing its strength. Because I see a woman worth saving, and because this town, my town, doesn't abandon people in need. That evening, Clara found herself in the kitchen of a sturdy timber house on the edge of Redemption Creek, her hands finally steady as she prepared a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. The kitchen was well stocked, but showed the neglect of a man who ate for fuel rather than pleasure. Through the window, she watched Wade in the corral, working with a paint stallion that clearly didn't want to be worked with. "Easy, Tempest," his voice carried on the evening breeze. "Nobody here wants to break you. Just need you to trust me enough to let me help you." Clara found herself wondering if he was talking to the horse or sending her a message. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. Clara rose before dawn to start the stove, and Wade appeared precisely at 6 for coffee so strong it could strip paint. Their mornings were quiet, him reviewing wanted posters and territorial dispatches, her kneading bread or mending his perpetually torn shirts. He was meticulous in respecting the boundaries he'd promised, never entering her room, always knocking before coming into shared spaces, paying her each week in cash he counted out on the kitchen table. But the boundaries blurred in smaller ways. She learned he took his coffee black, his steaks rare, and his silence seriously, but that he had a dry wit that emerged in unexpected moments. He learned she couldn't sleep during thunderstorms, that she hummed old hymns while cooking, and that she'd taught herself to read using borrowed books and pure stubbornness. "You're educated," he observed one evening, finding her with his copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "Educated enough to know I want more of it," Clara replied, defensive instinct making her voice sharp. Wasn't criticism. Wade leaned against the doorframe, his vest unbuttoned after a long day, dark hair curling slightly from sweat. "There's a schoolteacher 2 towns over, Mrs. Patterson. She runs a lending library. I could introduce you." The casual way he offered to expand her world, expecting nothing in return, made Clara's chest tighten. The first crack in their careful professional distance came during a July thunderstorm that turned the creek into a raging torrent. Clara woke gasping from a nightmare where Harold Griggs's hands were around her throat, only to find her room pitch black and the house shaking with thunder. She'd pressed herself into the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, trying to remember she was safe, she was free, she was Clara. Wade's voice came from outside her locked door. "I heard you cry out. I'm right here if you need anything. You're safe." "I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't breathe right. The storm." "I'm going to sit outside your door. You don't have to open it, but I'll be here until morning. You're not alone." And he had. When dawn broke and she finally opened her door, Wade was leaning against the wall, his rifle across his lap, clearly having stayed awake all night. His eyes were bloodshot but alert, and when he saw her, relief flooded his features. "Coffee?" he asked simply. That morning, over steaming cups, she told him about Harold Griggs, about being forced into a dowry arrangement she'd never agreed to, about the bruises and the threats, about stealing her mother's wedding ring to buy passage west and the guilt that gnawed at her for it. Wade listened without interruption, his jaw progressively tightening until she finished. "You weren't stolen property then, and you're not now," he said finally. "You're a person with rights. If Griggs or your father ever show up here, they'll find the law and me standing between them and you." "Why do you care?" Clara asked, the question raw and genuine. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his calloused fingers turning his coffee cup. My mother was forced into a dowry marriage, 16 years old, married to a man who saw her as livestock he'd purchased. He wasn't kind. By the time I was old enough to stop him, she'd stopped wanting to be saved. His voice roughened. She died when I was 17. And I swore I'd never let another woman feel that powerless if I could prevent it. You remind me of her. Same fire in the eyes, same refusal to break, no matter how bent. Clara's hand moved of its own accord, covering his on the table. His skin was warm, rough with scars and hard work. He looked at their joined hands like they were something miraculous and terrifying. I won't hurt you, he said quietly. I'll die before I hurt you. I know, Clara whispered, and realized she meant it. The touching became more frequent after that, his hand steadying her elbow when the wagon hit a rut on their trips to town, her fingers straightening his collar before he left for patrol, their shoulders brushing as they washed dishes side by side. Each contact felt electric, charged with possibility neither dared name. Wade began teaching her to shoot, taking her out to a clearing where he set up tin cans on fence posts. He stood behind her, his chest against her back, as he adjusted her grip on his spare Colt revolver. Breathe steady, his voice rumbled against her ear. Squeeze, don't pull. Clara's hands trembled, but not from fear of the gun. Wade's proximity made her hyper-aware of every point where their bodies connected. His hands covering hers, his breath stirring her hair, the solid strength of him surrounding her like a shield. Go slow, she murmured, her voice catching. My hands hurt from kneading bread this morning. I'll be gentle. His promise seemed to extend beyond just shooting lessons when she finally fired and hit the center can dead on. Wade's whoop of approval made her laugh, a sound she hadn't made in months. He spun her around, his hands on her waist, and for a breathless moment, they were close enough to kiss. His eyes dropped to her mouth, and Clara felt herself swaying forward. A distant gunshot cracked through the air, and Wade's expression transformed from tender to lethal in a heartbeat. Get behind me. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and Clara's blood turned to ice. Harold Griggs sat astride the center horse, his florid face twisted with rage and satisfaction. Her father flanked him on one side, a hired gun she didn't recognize on the other. That's my property you're harboring, Sheriff, Griggs called out, his voice carrying the entitled arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. Clara's father here signed a contract. She belongs to me, bought and paid for with a 50-head dowry. Wade's hand moved to his revolver with practiced ease, but he kept himself positioned between Clara and the riders. People aren't property in the territories, Griggs, and that sure as hell isn't how the law works. Your law, her father spat, finally showing his true colors. I needed that dowry to save my business. Harold's willing to overlook her running away, after appropriate discipline. Go slow with your next words, Wade warned, his voice dropping to a register Clara had never heard, deadly quiet, absolutely certain. Because depending what comes out of your mouth, you might not leave this clearing alive. Griggs laughed, a wet, ugly sound. You're outnumbered, lawman. And you're not going to shoot a respectable businessman over some hysterical girl who... Clara stepped out from behind Wade's protection, raising the Colt he'd just taught her to use. Her hands were steady now, her aim true. I'm not property. I was never forced into a dowry. I was sold without consent, and I'm not going back. Clara, Wade said quietly, pride and concern warring in his voice. You don't have to. Yes, I do. They need to hear it from me. She kept the gun trained on Griggs. You laid hands on me without permission. You threatened and terrorized me. And my father, her voice broke slightly. My father chose money over his own daughter's safety. I'd rather die free than live as your captive. Touching speech, the hired gun drawled, his hand moving toward his weapon. But the lady's coming with. Wade's shot took the man's hat clean off his head before he could finish the sentence. Next one takes your hand, then your life. Your move. The tableau held for an eternal moment. Clara's gun on Griggs, Wade's on the hired gun, her father looking increasingly uncertain as reality penetrated his greed. This isn't over, Griggs snarled, but his horse was already backing up. I have lawyers, contracts, and I have territorial authority, telegraph access, and a judge who doesn't take kindly to men who traffic in human beings. Wade's voice was steel. You come near her again, and contract or not, you'll find yourself in a cell or a grave. Are we clear? They rode off with threats and curses, but they rode off. Clara's hands finally began to shake, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. Wade gently removed the Colt from her grip and holstered it, then pulled her against his chest. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. Together, we face everything together. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his vest, feeling his heart pound as hard as hers. Thank you. For what? For seeing me as a person worth saving. For treating me like I have value beyond what men can take from me. Wade pulled back, just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Clara, you are the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. What you did just now, standing up to them despite your fear, that's the kind of courage I see in the best lawmen I know. You're not just worth saving, you're worth standing beside. His lips were gentle, despite the roughness of his stubble, asking rather than demanding. Clara rose on her toes, her hands fisting in his vest, kissing him back with all the emotion she'd been containing for weeks. Gratitude, desire, trust, and something deeper she was afraid to name. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you. Have been since you told Miller you weren't that kind of woman. With your chin up and fire in your eyes. If that's not welcome, it's welcome, Clara interrupted, her voice fierce. I'm falling too. I thought I'd never trust a man again. But you're different. You've shown me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. That a man can be powerful and gentle. That I can be both protected and free. Always free, Wade promised. I want a partner, Clara, not a possession. Someone who stands with me, not behind me. Together, she echoed, the word feeling like a vow. The next weeks were a revelation. Wade courted her properly. Wildflowers left on her pillow, evening rides to watch the sunset, stolen kisses in the barn that left them both breathless. But he also respected her pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always asking permission before crossing new boundaries. Clara found herself blossoming under his patient attention. She started wearing her grandmother's earrings again, symbols of survival rather than desperation. She borrowed books from Mrs. Patterson and began teaching basic reading to some of the town's children whose parents couldn't afford schooling. She learned to ride astride, to rope cattle, to navigate by stars. You're building a life here, Wade observed one evening as they sat on his porch, her head on his shoulder, watching fireflies dance. Our life, Clara corrected, if you want that. Wade turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Clara Whitmore, I've never been good with fancy words. I'm a man better with actions than speeches. But I need you to know, you've changed everything for me. This house isn't just a place I sleep anymore. This town isn't just a job. You've made it all mean something. He fumbled in his pocket and produced a simple gold band. This was my mother's, the only thing she owned that was truly hers. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. I'm asking you to marry me, not because you need protection or I need a housekeeper, but because I love you. Because I want to spend my life standing beside you, facing whatever comes together. Clara's tears came freely now, but they were tears of joy. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was simple, held in the town's small church with half of Redemption Creek in attendance. Clara wore a cream dress Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, wildflowers in her hair. Wade wore his best suit, the silver star still pinned over his heart. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing cheers from the congregation. The telegram arrived during their modest reception. Wade read it, his expression darkening before clearing. It's from the territorial judge. Harold Griggs has been arrested for attempting to bribe a federal marshal to kidnap you. Your father's dowry contract has been voided. Turns out forced marriage contracts aren't legally binding. You're completely free. Clara took the telegram, read it twice, then carefully folded it and tucked it in her reticule. I was already free, she said firmly. The moment I chose to run. The moment you offered me dignity instead of pity. The moment I realized my worth isn't determined by what men try to take from me, but by what I choose to give. She looked up at her husband. And I choose to give you my heart, my trust, my future. Not because I have to, because I want to. Wade pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. That's the best wedding gift I could have gotten. As autumn painted the valley in shades of amber and crimson, Clara stood in the doorway of what was now truly her home, watching Wade work with Tempest in the corral. The stallion had finally accepted a saddle, responding to patience and respect rather than force, just as she had. Her hand rested on her stomach, where new life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Wade yet, wanting to wait until she was certain, but she could already imagine him as a father. Strong, patient, teaching their children that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, but companions. Behind her, the house smelled of baking bread and the lavender she'd planted by the window. Her grandmother's earrings sat in a place of honor on the dresser, no longer symbols of desperation, but of the courage it had taken to save herself. The lending library books were stacked on the table, bookmarked with notes for her next teaching session. She'd been forced into a dowry arrangement, treated as property, chased across territories. But she'd risen from desperation to become the wife of the West's most relentless sheriff, not through passive rescue, but through guidance, but through her own courage, her refusal to accept less than she deserved, and her willingness to trust one good man who saw her as an equal. Wade looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. That rare, genuine smile reserved only for her. He crossed the yard in long strides, boots kicking up dust, and kissed her thoroughly, right there in the doorway. What was that for? Clara asked, laughing. For being here, for choosing me, for being exactly who you are. He paused, his hand gentle on her cheek. I love you, Clara Dalton. I love you too, Wade. Together, always together. As the sun set over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara Whitmore Dalton stood in her husband's arms and knew she'd finally found what she'd been running toward all along. Not safety, not security, but home. A home built not on forced vows or dowry payments, but on mutual respect, hard-won trust, and a love that had grown from the rocky soil of the Wild West into something beautiful and unbreakable. She'd been forced into a dowry arrangement and had risen as the bride of the Wild West's most relentless sheriff. But more than that, she'd risen as herself, strong, free, and finally, gloriously whole. Continuation. The first snow came early that November, blanketing Redemption Creek in pristine white that made everything look innocent and new. Clara stood at the kitchen window, one hand pressed against the cool glass, the other resting protectively over her stomach. She'd confirmed it that morning. She was carrying Wade's child. The front door burst open, bringing a gust of frozen air, and her husband, stamping snow from his boots. His face was grim, the expression he wore when trouble was brewing. "What's wrong?" Clara asked immediately, moving toward him. Wade pulled off his gloves, his movements tense. "Received a telegram from the territorial marshal. There's been a series of robberies along the stage routes, violent ones. 3 drivers killed, passengers stripped of everything valuable. The gang's moving this direction." He paused, his jaw tight. "They're led by a man named Silas Crane. He's got a reputation for being particularly brutal with women." Clara felt ice slide down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. How long until they might reach here? Week, maybe less if they keep their current pace. Wade crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders, despite the tension radiating through him. "I'm deputizing 6 men tomorrow. We'll set up watch rotations, fortify the jail, prepare for—" "No." Clara's voice was firm. "You're not just preparing for a fight. You're preparing for a siege. Which means you need more than gun hands. You need supplies, medical preparations, safe places for women and children." Wade studied her face, and she saw the moment he truly understood what she was offering. "You want to organize the civilians? I want to make sure that if Crane's gang comes through here, we're not just ready to fight, we're ready to survive, together." She emphasized the last word deliberately. A slow smile curved Wade's mouth. "Have I mentioned lately that you're remarkable?" "Not since this morning," Clara replied, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "But I won't object to hearing it again." Over the next 3 days, Clara proved herself as formidable in organization as Wade was in combat. She gathered the town's women in the church, her voice calm but commanding as she outlined preparations. They needed medical supplies assembled, food and water stockpiled in defensible locations, children's hiding places identified, and a communication system established. Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, became her lieutenant. Together, they transformed the church basement into a makeshift hospital, with clean linens, boiled bandages, and every bottle of laudanum and whiskey the town could spare. Clara taught basic wound care to women who'd never done more than bandage scraped knees, her hands steady as she demonstrated pressure points and tourniquet placement. "You've done this before," Mrs. Patterson observed quietly as Clara showed them how to probe for bullets. "My grandmother was a field nurse in the Mexican War," Clara replied, the memory bittersweet. "She taught me everything she knew." Said a woman who could save lives had power no man could take from her. Wade watched her work with something like awe. His wife, who'd arrived in town desperate and terrified mere months ago, was now commanding respect and organizing defense with the confidence of a general. When she caught him staring, she raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind, Sheriff?" "Just thinking about how you keep surprising me," Wade said honestly. "Every time I think I know your depth, you show me there's more." Clara crossed to him, standing close enough that only he could hear her next words. "Wade, there's something I need to tell you. With everything happening, the timing isn't ideal, but—" A shout from outside cut her off. One of Wade's deputies burst through the door, his face flushed. "Sheriff, rider coming in fast from the south. Looks like he's been shot." The rider was barely conscious when they brought him into Clara's makeshift hospital. Blood soaked his shirt from a shoulder wound, and his breathing was shallow with pain. Clara immediately began cutting away the fabric while Mrs. Patterson boiled water. "Crane," the man gasped as Wade leaned over him. "Silas Crane's gang. They hit the noon stage. Killed everyone except me. Left me alive, too. To deliver a message." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Said they're coming for Redemption Creek. Said they heard the sheriff here, thinks he's tough. Wants to see how tough when they burn his town and take his woman." Wade's face went absolutely still, the kind of dangerous calm that preceded violence. Clara saw his hand move to his revolver, knuckles white. She placed her hand over his, feeling the tremor of rage he was fighting to contain. "Breathe," she murmured, holding his gaze. "I need you thinking clearly, not angry. We knew they were coming. Now we know when." Wade's breathing slowly steadied. "How long?" he asked the wounded rider. "They're a day behind me, maybe less." The man's eyes found Clara. "Ma'am, you should run. Get as far from here as—" "I'm not running." Clara interrupted firmly. "This is my home. These are my people, and that monster doesn't get to chase me ever again." The next 24 hours were a controlled chaos of preparation. Wade positioned his 6 deputies at strategic points around town, with sightlines covering all approaches. The church bell would ring 3 times for danger, twice for all clear. Non-combatants were assigned to the church basement or the schoolhouse, both reinforced with furniture barricades. Clara worked until her hands ached and her back screamed, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not when every bandage she rolled, every bullet she counted, might mean the difference between life and death for someone she'd come to care about. It was near midnight when Wade found her in their bedroom, finally sitting down, her hands trembling with exhaustion. He knelt before her, concern etched in every line of his face. "Clara, you need to rest. You've barely eaten today, and I'm pregnant," she blurted out, the words escaping before she could plan them. "I found out this morning, before everything exploded. I'm carrying our child, Wade, and I'm terrified, but also so happy. I can barely breathe, and the timing is terrible, but I couldn't not tell you when tomorrow might." Wade kissed her, cutting off the rush of words. His hands were gentle as they cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "A baby," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. Wade pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there made her heart stutter. Joy, wonder, fierce protectiveness, and love so profound it took her breath away. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said roughly. "Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful, Clara, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose beyond just the badge, and now a family." His hand moved to rest gently over her stomach. This child is going to know a mother who's brave enough to stand against monsters, who's strong enough to build something from nothing, who chose freedom over safety. And a father who taught me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites, Clara added, covering his hand with hers. Wade, promise me something. Tomorrow, when Crane comes, I'll come back to you, Wade promised. To both of you, I swear it. They held each other through the long night, neither sleeping, both trying to memorize the feel of the other's heartbeat, the rhythm of their breathing, the warmth of skin on skin. As dawn broke gray and cold, they rose together to face whatever was coming. Clara dressed in practical clothes, her riding split skirt, a simple blouse, boots she could run in if needed. She braided her hair tight, her grandmother's earrings glinting in the early light. Wade watched her prepare, with the same intensity she'd seen him use when checking his weapons. You look like a warrior, he observed. I am one, Clara replied simply. Just a different kind than you. The gang arrived with the noon sun, 10 riders, spread in a loose line across the main street. Silas Crane was immediately identifiable, tall, whip-thin, with a scarred face and dead eyes that swept over the town like he was cataloging prey. His voice carried clear and cold in the winter air. Sheriff Dalton, heard you've been making noise about law and order in these parts. Thought we'd come educate you on how things really work. His gaze found Clara, standing visible in the church doorway, and his smile was a predator's. That the woman? Pretty thing. Might keep her when we're done burning this place to ash. Wade stepped into the street, his deputies emerging from their positions to flank him. 6 against 10, but Clara had learned that numbers weren't everything. Wade's men were fighting for home, for family. Crane's gang was fighting for greed. You're not welcome here, Crane, Wade called out, his voice carrying absolute authority. Turn around now, and you ride away alive. Stay, and I promise you'll regret it. Crane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Big talk from a man outnumbered. Tell you what, send out the woman, and maybe we'll only rob you blind instead of killing everyone. She comes peaceful, nobody else has to die. Nobody's going anywhere. Clara's voice rang out strong and clear as she stepped fully into view. Behind her, the women of Redemption Creek emerged from the church, each one armed, some with rifles, some with pistols, some with nothing more than kitchen knives and cast-iron pans. But they stood together, a wall of determination that made Crane's smile falter. You're not taking our town, Clara continued, raising the Colt Wade had taught her to shoot. You're not taking our homes, and you're sure as hell not taking me. This is Redemption Creek, and we don't surrender to bullies and thieves. For a moment, the tableau held. 2 sides, each waiting for the other to break. Then Crane's hand moved toward his weapon, and everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Wade's deputies had positioned themselves perfectly, catching 3 of Crane's men in a crossfire before they could properly react. Clara dropped to one knee, firing with the steady precision Wade had drilled into her. Her shot taking a rider's hat off and making him duck for cover. The fight was brutal and fast. Crane's gang had numbers, but Wade's people had preparation and position. Mrs. Patterson proved surprisingly deadly with a hunting rifle, dropping 2 men from the church bell tower. The town blacksmith charged out with a sledgehammer, bellowing like a bull, and personally ended the threat of the gang's largest member. But Crane himself was heading straight for Clara, his gun drawn, murder in his eyes. Wade saw, shouted a warning, but was engaged with two opponents. Clara raised her Colt, squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. Time seemed to slow as Crane's finger tightened on his trigger. Clara saw her death in his eyes, thought of the child she carried, thought of Wade, thought of how close she'd come to building everything she'd ever wanted. A shot rang out, and Crane jerked, a red flower blooming on his shoulder. He spun, and Clara saw her father standing at the edge of town, a smoking rifle in his hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "No one hurts my daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "Not even for all the money in the world. Not ever again." The sight of their leader wounded broke the gang's cohesion. Within minutes, the remaining outlaws were either dead, captured, or fleeing at full gallop. Wade crossed to Clara in 3 long strides, pulling her against him with hands that trembled. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I'm fine. We're fine." Clara held him tight, feeling his heart thunder against her cheek. "Wade, my father, he saved me." Clara's father approached slowly, the rifle hanging loose in his hands, shame and sorrow carved into every line of his face. "Clara, I don't expect forgiveness. Don't deserve it. But I couldn't let him hurt you. When I heard they were coming for you, I rode 2 days straight to get here, to try to make up for." His voice broke. "I sold you for gold. I'm going to live with that until I die. But maybe, if you'll let me, I can try to be the father you deserved all along." Clara looked at Wade, who nodded slightly. The choice was hers. She stepped forward, studying the man who'd betrayed her, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Weak, yes. Flawed, absolutely. But in this moment, trying. "You can't undo what you did," she said quietly. "You can't erase the fear or the pain or the fact that I had to run for my life. But," she placed a hand on her stomach, thinking of the child growing there, "but I also can't teach my child about forgiveness if I'm not willing to practice it myself. You saved my life today. That's a start. A very small start, but a start." Her father's sob was wrenching. "Thank you. Clara, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Clara said firmly. "Thank me by proving you've changed, by respecting the life I've built here, by treating me like a person, not property. Can you do that?" "Yes. God, yes. I swear it." The aftermath of the battle took days to resolve. Crane and his surviving men were locked in Wade's reinforced jail, awaiting the territorial marshal. The town buried 2 of their own, good men who'd stood against evil and paid the ultimate price. Clara organized the funerals, holding the hands of grieving widows, promising that Redemption Creek would care for their children. Her father stayed, taking a room at the boarding house and working without complaint on rebuilding the parts of town damaged in the fight. Clara watched him carefully, looking for signs of the selfish man who'd sold her, but saw instead someone genuinely trying to atone. It would take time, years maybe, to rebuild trust, but she was willing to try. One evening, 2 weeks after the battle, Clara stood in the church, looking at the small memorial they'd erected. Names carved in wood, flowers placed by grateful townsfolk. Wade came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands settling protectively over where their child grew. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured against her hair. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Clara replied, leaning back against his strength. 6 months ago, I was running for my life, selling my grandmother's earrings for food. Now I'm here, home, with a husband I love, a child on the way, a town that respects me, and even my father trying to make amends. It's almost too much to believe. You earned every bit of it, Wade said firmly. You chose courage over fear. You chose to stand and fight instead of running. You chose to build instead of just surviving. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd shown her what real partnership looked like. We chose, Wade. Together, remember? Always together, he agreed, and kissed her as the sunset painted the church windows in shades of amber and gold. But their story was far from over. The true test of their partnership was only just beginning. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, a hard-eyed woman named Sarah Blackwood, who listened to testimonies, examined evidence, and pronounced sentence with the weight of federal authority. Crane and his surviving gang members would hang. Clara's father would testify against Harold Griggs's attempted bribery and kidnapping conspiracy. There's one more matter, Marshal Blackwood said, her sharp gaze settling on Wade. We're establishing circuit court jurisdictions for this region. Redemption Creek would be the seat for 3 counties. It would mean more responsibility, more danger, but also more authority and resources. I'm recommending you for the territorial judge position, Sheriff Dalton. You've proven you can handle law enforcement. Now I want to see if you can handle justice. Wade looked at Clara immediately, the question clear in his eyes. This wasn't his decision alone. What would it mean for our family? Clara asked directly. More stability than sheriff work, Blackwood replied. Court sessions 4 times a year, but otherwise you'd be home. Training deputies, reviewing cases, building infrastructure. Your wife's organizational skills would be invaluable. We'd need a proper courthouse, record-keeping systems, witness coordination. Clara saw the opportunity, not just for Wade, but for the town, for the region. A chance to build something lasting, to create justice instead of just enforcing it. But also more risk, more responsibility, more demands on the man she loved. What do you want? She asked Wade softly. Wade took her hand, his thumb rubbing circles over her wedding ring. I want to build something permanent. Not just enforce the law, but shape it. Make sure women like you have real legal protection, that forced marriages are prosecuted, that... He paused, emotion roughening his voice. I want our child to grow up in a world with more justice than I had growing up. This could help create that, but only if you're with me. Then we do it together, Clara decided. Build your court, Judge Dalton. I'll build the systems to support it. Over the next months, as Clara's belly swelled with new life, Redemption Creek transformed. A proper courthouse went up, timber and stone built to last generations. Clara established record-keeping protocols, interviewed potential clerks, and created a witness protection system for people testifying against powerful criminals. She also started something else, a legal aid society for women. Too many women in the territories lacked any recourse when faced with forced marriages, violent husbands, or property theft. Clara used her own story, her own terror and triumph, to create pathways for others. You're building a legacy, Mrs. Patterson observed one afternoon, watching Clara teach a young woman how to file for legal separation from an abusive husband. I'm building what I needed when I was desperate, Clara corrected. Every woman who walks through that door deserves what Wade gave me: respect, dignity, and real choices. Her father proved himself through action rather than words, working tirelessly on construction, donating money to Clara's legal aid fund, and never once asking for forgiveness he hadn't earned. Clara watched him carefully, but allowed him to be present, to be useful. When he asked tentatively about the baby, she showed him the small clothes she was sewing, and saw tears in his eyes. "I won't be the grandfather I should be," he said quietly. "I know that. But maybe I can be the one you'll allow around your child. The one who tries." "Maybe," Clara agreed, and left it at that. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Clara was heavily pregnant now, moving carefully, her body preparing for the monumental task ahead. Wade was simultaneously excited and terrified, reading every book on childbirth he could find, consulting with the midwife until the woman banned him from her office for asking too many questions. "You're going to wear yourself out worrying," Clara told him one evening, laughing at his latest anxiety. "What if the baby came during a trial session?" "I just want to be prepared." Wade insisted. "I want to be there for you, too." "Wade." Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You've been there for me since the moment we met. You'll be there when this baby comes, and we'll figure out everything else together, like we always do." Labor came on a Tuesday morning, hard and fast. Clara was in the courthouse, reviewing documents when her water broke, and suddenly the careful preparations gave way to primal urgency. Wade carried her to their home, the midwife was summoned, and for the next 14 hours, Clara learned that childbirth was simultaneously the most terrifying and empowering experience of her life. "Go slow," she gasped at one point, pain lancing through her. "It hurts." "I know, sweetheart," Wade murmured, supporting her as she gripped his hand hard enough to bruise. "You're doing so well. You're the strongest person I know. Just breathe, and don't tell me to breathe," Clara snapped, then immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Tell me anything you need," Wade said firmly. "Yell at me, curse me, break my hand if it helps. I'm not going anywhere." When their daughter finally arrived, red-faced, screaming with outrage, perfect, Clara felt something shift in her soul. This tiny person, this combination of her and Wade, represented everything she'd fought for. Freedom, choice, love freely given rather than forced. "She's beautiful," Wade breathed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he cradled his daughter with hands that had killed men, but now trembled with reverence. "Clara, she's perfect." "Hope," Clara said suddenly. "Her name should be Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for something better. Hope for a future where girls don't get sold. Hope that good men exist and genuine partnership is possible." "Hope Dalton," Wade tested the name. "It's perfect. She's perfect. And so are you." He kissed Clara's forehead gently. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for together," Clara interrupted softly, watching their daughter sleep in Wade's arms. "Everything we've built, we built together. That's what makes it strong." The summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Hope proved to be a determined baby who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't shy about demanding it, a trait both parents recognized in themselves. Clara managed to balance motherhood with her legal aid work, sometimes conducting interviews with Hope sleeping in a basket beside her desk. The town adapted, protective of their judge's family, proud of Clara's work, invested in Hope's well-being. It had become truly a community, flawed and rough around the edges, but bound together by shared struggle and mutual respect. Clara's father was a careful presence, never overstepping, always asking permission, slowly earning back fragments of trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. When Hope smiled at him for the first time, he cried openly, and Clara felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. One evening, as autumn painted the valley in copper and gold again, Clara stood on their porch, watching Wade play with Hope in the yard. Their daughter was laughing, that pure, joyful sound only babies make, as Wade lifted her toward the sunset, showing her the colors painting the sky. Mrs. Patterson approached, joining Clara at the railing. "You've built something remarkable here." "We have," Clara corrected gently. "This town, all of us together." "I meant you specifically," Mrs. Patterson insisted. "A year ago, you arrived with nothing but determination and desperation. Now look, a family, a purpose, a legacy of helping others find their own freedom. You were forced into a dowry arrangement, but you rose to become not just the judge's wife, but a force in your own right. The bride of the West's most relentless sheriff, yes, but also Clara Dalton, advocate, organizer, mother, and one of the strongest women I've ever known." Friends, Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I almost gave up. That day in Miller's store, I was so close to just accepting that I had no value beyond what men could take from me." "But you didn't," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You fought, and you taught the rest of us that we could fight too. That's your real legacy, Clara. Not the courthouse or the legal aid society, but the knowledge you've spread that women are worth more than dowry payments and forced vows." That night, after Hope was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Wade lay in bed, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady, strong, reliable. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Taking me in that day. Your life was simpler before." "Stop," Wade interrupted gently, but firmly. "Clara, you didn't complicate my life. You completed it. Before you, I was going through motions, enforcing law because it was right, but not really living. You taught me what I was protecting, what justice actually means. You gave me purpose beyond the badge." "You gave me the same," Clara whispered. "The freedom to choose, the safety to become who I really am, the partnership I never knew was possible. Together?" Wade murmured, the word that had become their foundation. "Always together," Clara confirmed. But even as they held each other in the darkness, both knew their journey wasn't over. Building a life, building justice, building a family. These were ongoing acts of courage, not destinations to be reached. There would be more challenges, more threats, more moments where they'd have to choose between safety and principle. But they would face them the same way they'd faced everything since that day in Miller's General Store, standing side by side, protecting what they built, fighting for what mattered. Clara had been forced into a dowry arrangement by men who saw her as property. But she'd risen, not because a man saved her, but because she saved herself and found a partner who recognized her worth. She'd become the bride of the West's most relentless sheriff, but more importantly, she'd become herself, strong, capable, fierce in her compassion, unwavering in her conviction that every person deserved dignity and choice. as sleep finally claimed them both, Hope's soft breathing audible through the open door, Clara's last thought was simple and profound. This is what freedom looks like. This is what love looks like. This is what it means to choose and be chosen in return. And in the morning, they would wake to do it all again, building justice, raising their daughter, protecting their community, and loving each other with the fierce devotion of two people who knew exactly how precious their partnership was. The Wild West was still wild, but it was also home, and home was worth fighting for. Together. Always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Clara and Wade's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.